according to the sectors within which we are operating. The Police and Tourism Civil Rights Union members, as essential service providers and frontline workers, have, along with various other workers and members of the society, experienced one of most hit-hitting times since COVID-19 outbreak, which has drastically changed all work and living conditions which have until recently been seen as normal. With these extensive changes to our normal ways of life, we have seen an upside in the loss of lives, while many continue to be infected on a daily basis. This has been the case within the criminal justice cluster, as I've said. In efforts to suppress the spread of this pandemic, we have thus far witnessed 10,534 infections within the Department of Correctional Service, with 220 deaths reported so far. While in the South African Police Service, we have seen 26,861 infections with 520 deaths. These figures demonstrate the extent of the toll suffered by law enforcement officers who have dedicated their efforts towards ensuring that they work together with communities in suppressing the spread of this pandemic. As a union, we want to take our hats off to these men and women who continue to fight the good fight despite the rising COVID-19 death amongst our colleagues. And we want to welcome the 1 million doses of vaccines that arrived in this country, as we all know that it arrived this past Monday. We are of the view that the availability provides for our members and citizens in general the opportunity to turn the tide on these diseases. However, despite the pandemic, there have been numerous challenges faced within our sectors, and the pandemic has only served to worsen the already deteriorating conditions. Let us get on the issue of the notice of motion, in particular to the Constitutional Court, in regard to what has happened recently. The public servants continue to be frustrated by government since they refused to implement the last leg of Regulation 1 of 2018, especially Clause 3.3, which speaks about the general increase to the public service members. Part of the appeal court judgment, it ruled that enforcement of Clause 3.3 of Resolution 1 of 2018 as unlawful and in contravention of subsection 213 and 215 of the Constitution of South Africa, as well as the Public Service Regulation 78 and 79. It is in our held view that the judgment goes against Section 23 of the Constitution and unacceptably undercuts the Labour Relations Act and collective bargaining in its totality. Such decisions have seen a rise in workers' financial hardship while basic commodities prices continue to rise on a daily basis. And despite the fact that the South African government has been reported to the International Labour Organization, which is ILO, for its attack on collective bargaining, they, especially the National Treasury, have remained unwavering on their refusal to pay workers their salary increase, which were due on the 1st of April 2020. Surely everyone will be knowing that when we get into the agreement of this Resolution 1 of 2018, we got it as the collective together with the stakeholders, knowing that it must have been budgeted for. So we got a surprise to say that there is no budget or payment for the salary increase, specifically for the last leg. And we were caught by surprise because I think we all knew that around January 2018, the Cabinet even approved that submission. So one can only ask himself a question that who between the Minister of Finance and the Cabinet itself. So I think that is something that needs to be clarified by our government. It is in this regard that POPCRU, working with COSATU public service unions and others, will continue rolling out mass actions to aggressively fight the onslaught on workers' austerity measures and defend collective bargaining, including the announced 3-year wage freeze in the public service. To this end, we will be participating and on preparation of marches and all other necessary actions that are to be finalized in the current month. Lastly, we have, together with the South African Teachers Union and DINOSA, filed a notice of motion to the Constitutional Court on Friday, the 29th of January 2021, to compel the state to fully implement Clause 3.3 of the PSCBC Resolution 1 of 2018. This decision comes after the Labour Appeal Court earlier ruled that Clause 3.3 of PSCBC Resolution 1 of 2018 is unconstitutional, and the respondents are given 15 working days to oppose the motion, which upon failure to execute, the court will rule in our favor. Even if they can submit this motion, we are quite confident that in relation of Section 23 of the Constitution, we will come victorious out of this battle. On the public service wage freeze, for some time now, the Department of Public Service and the administration, in particular, Minister Mkhunu, has been threatening to cut the size of the public service and implement a wage freeze. Currently, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni and the National Treasury are busy reversing the hard-won gains of workers while disrupting the collective bargaining. When the democracy came into place, we went through the process of implementing good legislative framework that will guide us. And one of it was a Good Labor Relation Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and other pieces of the legislative framework. And that was a sign of saying we are a country that is governed, and all of us must adhere to it. So we are very much disappointed and, of course, discontent by the attitude of the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni on some of the decisions that he's taking, which seems to be far away from the very same legislative framework that we have all accepted as guiding document of the country. They are intending to cut 60 billion for 2021-22 in the public sector. Further than that, their intention is to cut 90 billion for 23-22 and 150 billion for 23-24 from the very same public sector. The public sector that we all know that in actual fact it is understaffed when you compare it with the population of the country. And if you cut, it means you say indirectly, you retrench, you dismiss, or at some point you're saying that you deal with people to load their morals, and which is something that we cannot accept as POPCRU. We have seen that the Minister of Finance have already started this year by cutting 37 billion from the last leg of 2018 wage agreement. And that is quite concern for us, and we will fight to the bitter end to make sure that our members get what is due to them. Our own democratically elected government is leading the onslaught on collective bargaining and reneging on binding collective agreements. As a result, we have started to observe other employers in other sectors who are starting to dig in their heels in implementing collective bargaining agreements because they are taking a cue from the government. Through the world, capitalist countries have implemented interventions that have further plunged the working class into unimaginable crises that have led to the massive job losses, the salary cuts, and the cuts to the social spending. However, a few elites have managed to amass more wealth by inflating prices of basic commodities and medical supplies. Many countries are failing to attain pre-COVID-19 crisis growth levels, and this will eventually lead to the widening of the income of inequality, slow down in demand, which will ultimately lead to the high level of unemployment and poverty. Locally, the National Treasury continues to lead an unrelenting attack on workers, the working class and the poor. The Treasury has constantly prioritized containing the public debt by cutting government spending, which has resulted in diminishing of the quality of service delivered and led to the mass unemployment. Moreover, Treasury dismally failed to contain the growth of the public debt as it kept on ballooning year after year, not at least because of the increasing billions worth of tranches in bailouts given to the ever-rising number of the mismanaged state-owned entities and overspending by some departments. At the same time, year on year, the Auditor General kept on reporting that at least about 10% of government's budget is drained by corruption, by irregularities and wasteful and fruitful expenditures. We reject the misguided proclamation that the outbreak of the coronavirus has led to the government not being able to honor the agreement. When the outbreak took place in the country, the economy was already falling into a recession, following consecutive contractions in the last quarter of 2019 and the first quarter of 2020 because of a very low rate of private sector investment compounded by declining government spending. On the 8th of December 2020, the GDP rebounded by 13.5% for third quarter as lockdown restrictions were being relaxed. Compared with the same period in the year 2019, the GDP contracted by 6%, the second straight quarter of decline. On traffic matters, we want to commend the work done in all provinces by traffic officials in working to curb the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. Our busy roads have, through their tireless efforts, been a safer space for journey through. There was 5.7% decline in road fatalities and an 8% decline in crashes, including a total arrest of 2,111 motorists on the roadblocks during 20 days of the 1st December. We also wish to commend the Traffic Law Enforcement Review Committee for finalizing its work, which gears and empowers the Department of Transport to nationalize traffic. We also welcome the work done by the Department of Transport to implement some of the recommendations of the Traffic Law Enforcement Review Committee, which are low-lying, and we call to the Minister of Transport to move with speed in establishing the bargaining forum, which shall culminate in a bargaining council for the National Traffic Police as urgently as possible to deal with unifying of the conditions of employment for traffic officials. For sure, some of you seated here are aware that traffic officials across the country in respective provinces are actually scattered. Some are falling within agricultural department, some are falling within public works, some within community safety and police. So what we are saying here is that we need an urgent attention of this matter to be nationalized, so that as part of law enforcement agency, traffic can take a cue from the Department of Correctional Service and the police in terms of the standard approach and the service of conditions. On learners in correctional services, the learnership of correctional services offered to the learners within the department is an essential part of basic training, and it is a requirement for one to be appointed at the entry level for production level. It is a unique learnership for correctional services because it assists in equipping the learners with the skills and knowledge on the know how to rehabilitate and further make work within the Department of Correctional Service. There is currently a dire shortage of personnel within our correctional centers, and this is happening while over 2,000 learners who have underwent all training processes are isolated and not been absorbed into these correctional centers, as has been the norm that when learners complete this basic training, they get absorbed. It is the first in the dawn of democracy, and it is the first in the dawn of the current of the National Commissioner. This has never happened in the history of the Department of Correctional Service, and we so wish that this can bring sense to the National Commissioner to understand that the understaffing needs to be addressed through the learners that have been trained and equipped with skills in doing such work. There have been a lot of resources spent. There have been a lot of resources spent on the training and accommodation of these learners from the departmental coffers, whilst SASITAS has been paying out stipends for their sustenance. All these resources would result in a wasteful expenditure in the midst of financial challenges faced by the government, as they could have otherwise been channeled to other productive factors. As a union, we have been receiving a lot of concerns over letters of contract termination sent to these learners by the DCS at different management areas, with most stating that as of the 31st of December 2020, their contracts have been terminated. Though the DCS have been consistently denying this, there is a littered proof to that effect, and we urge all learners not to sign these termination contracts. We were left with no option or no choice but to have our lawyers follow up in resolving this matter, and they are currently handling it. We are quite confident that with time, this will yield a positive result. Taxpayers also need to take keen interest in how their tax is being utilized, especially following the revelations out of the DCS and Bosasa relationship, where large amounts of funds were sourced out for tendering, while other core mandates of the Department of Correctional Services, which is primary task of rehabilitation, was and remains far from being met. Correctional officials continue to remain vulnerable to attacks because of the correctional centers management forced them to escort inmates single-handedly, going against its policy of having officials for an individual offender. This has placed the lives of officials at risk, while the courts also do not allow for inmates to be shackled when approaching the court. The Correctional Services Management has effectively declared lives of correctional officials irrelevant by their failure to comply to their safety policies, and this incident has adversely affected the morale of many other correctional officials who continue to be single-handedly forced to escort dangerous convicted criminals or face the risk of being charged by the very same management that claims to prioritize their interest. We want to categorically state that all correctional officials across the country should bluntly refuse to escort maximum inmates to the escort of hospitals in the ratio of not 2:1, meaning that there should always be 2 correctional officials that is escorting a criminal or an inmate, excluding the driver. Those are the policies of the Department of Correctional Services. And we have seen them moving far away from their policies, abusing our members, intimidating them, and at some extent threatening them with charges by mere failing to implement their own policies. All officials should work strictly in accordance with the defined policies, and no amount of intimidation from the management will be tolerated. Pivoted with the challenges ranging from overcrowding, the staff shortages, ailing infrastructure, and the lack of the resources to appropriately meet its rapidly increasing demands, it has in many ways lost the opportunity to implement its core task, which is to rehabilitate the inmates. Inmates should equally be integrated into rural development projects that will assist with our national developmental goals as a way of paying back to the communities they have wronged, instead of being spoon-fed through taxpayers' money while remaining idling in those buildings. Our view on this matter is that inmates' employment within the facility will contribute towards their rehabilitation, their self-worth, dignity, and skills development, and all categories so vital towards the eventual successful of reintegration to the society. This will also reduce the level of criminal activities common within the prisons. We believe that time spent in incarceration must never be about inmates being idling and just lazing around for 24 hours on every day of their term of imprisonment. All inmates must contribute towards the running cost, and decent upkeeping of all the correctional centers. There should no longer be warehouse where people are stored until they get released from the prison. We must work. I think when you make your own analysis and observation, you might have been aware that almost 90% of the structures of the prison are in cities. What do we do about Kgosimampuru in Pretoria? What do we do about the Johannesburg Central Prison? And yet there are places where these things can be placed and these people get rehabilitated and through the process of being given skills. As and when they get reintegrated to the society, then at least we know that part of the job has been done. But now they are in luxurious prisons in cities and they do nothing, they idle for 24 hours. That must come to an end. We therefore call upon the DCS management to do the honorable thing by permanently employing all learners who completed this basic training in order to assist in dealing with understaffing at our correctional centers, in upholding the constitutional mandate of ensuring safe custody of inmates and ensure that they are fully rehabilitated when released. On private prison, we are delighted to have concluded a recognition agreement in Kenzani Correctional Management as well as the South African Custodian Management, which will be operating at Kutama Sintumula Correctional Center, and we will be unable to table demands of salary adjustment in particular for this quarter of the first quarter of 2021. We do know, however, that our position still stands, that let our government get away with private prisons. We fought to the bitter end for establishment of other triple Ps, and we were left with G4S in Bloemfontein, Free State, and Kutama Suntumule in Limpopo. We are saying it's high time that towards the end of their contracts, they must be integrated within the Department of Correctional Services. Some of them are not even providing, we believe so, with the services that are related to our country, because their models are far away from the models of South Africa. And we're wondering, why have we opted to go to the issue of the private prison in South Africa? But we hope that with the engagement we have been heard, because some of them which were to be built had to stop, and we are looking forward that towards the end of the contract of these two, they must definitely be absorbed within the Department of Correctional Service. Because our view is that much of the money, and of course chunk of the money, is taken for this, of which it is not even producing a positive result for this country. On restructuring of the South African Police Service, we welcome the restructuring process that is currently upholding within the SAPS. We are currently monitoring the extent to which this restructuring process is being implemented, particularly at the provincial level and district level. This process must ensure that we have more trained policemen and women on the ground fighting crime. Unlike where they are found to be in air-conditioned offices performing duties that is meant for public service appointee. The lesser number of men and women in blue performing administrative duties will ensure that the primary task of our constitutional mandate will contribute to lessening the number of criminality. We have said when we engage on this matter, we are tired of the high number of the police that are in the head office, in the provincial office, the top-heavy structures that are there, and yet we've got a serious challenge of crime down there. And we are saying these men and women in blue uniform are meant to protect the society of this country and its inhabitants. So it will be suicidal for us to agree that this high number of our own people that are sitting within those offices, and yet they have to come down and serve the society. So we hold a view which says that the South African Police Service